Here's the bottom line. If you can speak the language of the primitive brain and you know how to sell to the primitive brain, you are going to be wildly successful. Because number one, only about 0.0001% of entrepreneurs know this stuff. That's how new it is. Now, all the big players, Apple and Google, they're using this all the time. Have you ever seen any of the ads that Apple does for either their watches or anything they're selling? You notice they never talk about, you know, computing cycles or the memory or any of that stuff. They don't do
No.
that at all. No, they don't do any of that stuff. So they're selling directly to your emotional, the primitive part of the brain.
Pandemic, wars, constant changes and regulations, some instabilities. It feels that we have less and less places on this planet that feel safe, tension-free. But I really believe that it is a perfect time for entrepreneurs to actually exercise their skills, to learn more about adaptability and their customers,
Yeah.
their consumers, what they really want. That's why today we have an honor to have an absolutely amazing guest who's tuning in all the way from Canada. And I have a pleasure to learn from this business mentor. Les Evans is a highly respected business coach who were coaching thousands of entrepreneurs in 24 different countries, a former investment company CEO. Today, he is going to share with us some latest scientific insights about consumer behavior that will give entrepreneurs a strategic advantage in 2022 and beyond. So welcome, Les. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and it's wonderful to reconnect again with you. I'm just thrilled to be here. When I got your message, I was just like, you just called me at the perfect time. So,
Hey, thank you. And I'm just feeling this frustration that entrepreneurs, and let's make it clear, because there are big players who are decades on the market, having budget, resources, systems. It's one case. So let's focus
yes.
our conversation today on small and middle-sized businesses who are, in a
Hmm.
way, they have the foundation. But in my community, there are a lot of people who opened their businesses just before the pandemic. During the pandemic, they took this risk. And
Yep.
what had just happened in Europe, it was something that nobody was expecting, and just like that.
Yep.
And what is your general, let's start from general opinion about the shifts in consumer behavior and how entrepreneurs can take it into account to really thrive?
That is a very, very good question, and it's very relevant today. Like you said, and like your audience, I had just before the whole pandemic thing came in, I had invested a lot of money. I was about to go on a worldwide training tour,
Yeah.
and and then boom, so all that money that was invested went bye bye. So if you're an entrepreneur and you feel that frustration, I get it. I suffered the same exact pain and agony. And being the kind of nerd that I am, I noticed, like you said, a tremendous shift in the marketplace. And a lot of the big players, like you said, were doing some interesting things. And I was scratching my head and I was like, I want to get to the bottom of this. And of course, as you know, everybody was then going to use that famous word pivot to go
Yes,
online, which I'm not a fan of because it's kind of overused, but I get
exactly.
it. So we saw a couple things. Two or three things have really changed in the past. Number one is the internet has rewired human behavior because it's never existed before. So the internet has really changed, how we interact, et cetera, and how our brains work. And our brains, quite frankly, aren't adapted for this. And I'll touch on that in a little bit and how that can be a strategic advantage for any entrepreneur, really at any level. This is not a time to be afraid. This is a time to be excited
Mm.
because even though we saw, Of course, there was this massive exodus for people to try and go online. Everybody's trying to pivot and go online. So in some ways, that created difficulties because we're like, oh my gosh, there's all this market noise now, you know, and some businesses, like I've spoken professionally, as you know, I can't go speak professionally. Now, you've seen me speak on stage. I'm pretty good at what I do. But when you put that
are.
onto, thank you, but not to blow my own horn, but I'm just another person on Zoom. So you lose all that stage connectivity,
Yeah.
with the audience and the community building and all those things that make us human. We're kind of robbed of that stuff. So everybody's trying to get online, and now, so I'm this Zen guru, but online, I'm a nobody, right? And a lot of people are faced with that issue. How do I stand out? How do I differentiate? Now, the good news is, as you pointed out just 2 minutes ago, there is always room in the market for someone who's good. There is always room. And a person who's good has the skills to adapt to what's going on. So I'd like to share with you today some amazing insights into human behavior that you're probably unfamiliar with, because this is the stuff that Apple and Google and McDonald's is using. They're using something called neuroscience. And let me explain something that's really fascinating, because we're going to talk about consumer behavior, and I want to give your audience some actual tools. Once you have these insights, you're going to have a real shift, and you'll go, wow, this is going to be a huge strategic advantage. And the more you become aware of what I'm going to show you, the more excited you're going to be. So hang on to your hat. So here's the biggest mic drop for today. We have learned more about human behavior in the past 5 years than all of human history. Wow. Think about that. Yeah. That's incredible, right? Now, why is that? Because we've had the development of something called an MRI machine, magnetic resonance imaging. You've probably heard that. You go for a brain scan, right? So here's what's interesting. For the past 150 years, marketers, researchers, advertisers, salespeople have spent, I can't even tell you, hundreds of billions of dollars trying to figure out how to make people buy, right? How do you do that? And quite frankly, up until about 5-10 years ago, everything we've known is wrong because it was all guesswork. Yeah, I know that's an outrageous statement, but you'll see where I'm going with this. And it was a real shock to me, because when I first came into this about 3 years ago, I just about had a meltdown, because I said, oh my gosh, I'm obsolete. Everything, I spent a lifetime learning all this stuff, and it's obsolete because it's wrong. Now, it's not that I'm wrong. It wasn't my fault, and it's not your fault, because technology has changed. So here's what's happened. Yeah. So as you know, over the years, people would do focus groups, questionnaires, surveys, challenges, all this
stuff we learned.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Split testing and all that. And listen, that stuff has some validity. Don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But here's what happened. When the MRI machines came along, a couple of scientists said, hey, why don't we scan people's brains while they're looking at advertising? Because then they could see what parts of the brain were acting up. And here's what they found out. Now, as you know, most entrepreneurs have a basic knowledge of selling or marketing. So it's like we have facts and figures and features and benefits. We know that part. And then we engage the customer emotionally, right? Emotional engagement. And then somehow we make our presentation and hopefully we sell something. That's the rough format. But what we found, and this is the most amazing part, the part of the brain that makes the decisions is actually the primitive brain. The logical brain, so if you're trying to sell people with logic and reason, oh, look at how much sense this makes, and here's all the features and the benefits, that only works if they're already sold. Because this part of the brain, which is your logical part right here, it's the newest part of the brain. It can handle mathematics. It loves facts and figures, but it's only 5% of the buying decision. That's it. It's the part of the brain that simply justifies the decision.
Mm.
So what happens is you have 95% of the entrepreneurs spending 95% of their time trying to sell the 5% of the brain that doesn't even buy. Now, so you have three parts to your brain. The logical brain right here. This thing is very smart, but it's very slow, and it's a gas guzzling pig, if you'll forgive my attention. It's only about 3% of our body weight, but it uses more than 20% of our energy. So if you've ever seen people get overwhelmed very quickly, that's this part of the brain saying, I can't, because this brain is not meant to deal with the information. Today we get hit because of internet. This thing has to process 10,000 messages a day. It can't even keep up, not even close. So if you notice, like people today, they just don't read, they scroll, right?
Exactly.
In fact, the average person, this is fascinating for a metaphor, the average person today scrolls the length of the Empire State Building every day on their phone. Think about that. And yet here we are, us little entrepreneurs, small business people, we're trying to cut through all that stuff, right? So here's something else interesting. Now, it's a logical part of the brain. We have the emotional part of our brain. And what's really interesting is some brain scientists found that if a person suffers from brain damage and can't feel emotions, they can't make decisions. So what that means to us as marketers is we must have emotional engagement with our clients or anybody we're working with. Otherwise, nothing happens. It's a function. So we need the logic. That's important. We need the emotional connection. Now we get to the primitive brain. And this is the most fascinating thing. It's taken me 3 years of work with 2 PhDs to understand this stuff, but more so to break it down into simple things. What the primitive brain does, it has two main functions. Number one is survival. Its job is to protect us. And its second function is to filter out all the junk and noise. So it's saying, do I need to pay attention to this? Yes or no. So here's what happens. The primitive brain, and I don't want to get too complicated. This is actually relatively simple to understand if I just go bit by bit. Here's the bottom line. If you can speak the language of the primitive brain and you know how to sell to the primitive brain, you are going to be wildly successful. Because number one, only about 0.0001% of entrepreneurs know this stuff. That's how new it is. Now, all the big players, Apple and Google, they're using this all the time. Have you ever seen any of the ads that Apple does for either their watches or anything they're selling? You notice they never talk about, computing cycles or the memory or any of that stuff. They don't do that at all. No, they don't do any of that stuff. So they're selling directly to your the primitive part of the brain. Now, what's really funny about it, even though this is the lizard brain or the reptile brain or the primitive brain, it's actually the most complicated one to understand. Because the logical brain is easy. It just wants facts and figures and math. That's it. Primitive brain, emotional brain, it wants to be emotionally engaged. Very simple. This brain has a few different functions. So first of all, the primitive brain, anytime you meet somebody, the primitive brain is immediately evaluating you. Are you a friend or a foe? Are you an asset or a liability? Because it's only every person you meet within seconds. So quite often these sales decisions are made the second you meet somebody. Are you a threat to me or are you going to be a friend? And the reason for that, now here's what happens. When people try to sell you, you ever notice you get your back up right away? You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's because salespeople are a threat to the resources that we need for survival. That's it. And there's about 6 basic resources. So there's things like attention is a resource because we have to focus. Time is obviously attention. We only have so much. Money, health, our energy, our emotions. And then there are also things like strategic resources. For example, if somebody like me can teach you these new patterns, I'm going to be a tremendous strategic resource to you. I'm going to be a huge asset to you. So a research can, strategic stuff can be things like knowledge. you have knowledge that no one else has. So that gives
Mm.
you a strategic advantage. So every time everybody you meet is like, is this gonna represent a gain in resources or a drain in resources? And so the trade-off in value is, are you going to be worth it? The primitive brain is always saying, hey, maybe there's a person I want to get into a relationship with, but are you going to be worth it, or are you going to be an absolute nightmare? And this is how the primitive brain thinks. So once you understand that it's looking for assets and not liabilities, and then we have about 6 what I call primal buying fears. The primitive brain is very afraid of making a fool of itself. Have you ever noticed how people don't want to be public speakers?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is the number one driver of the primitive brain in an emotional part is it's seeking status. Because the higher your status is in society, you have all the goodies. You get better home, better relationship, better family, better school. You get better everything. It's like being a rock star. And if you make a fool of yourself, your status goes down.
Yeah.
So we are very afraid of, making mistakes, and we're afraid of making bad decisions, and etc. So there's about 6 primal buying fears. And what's really interesting is, instead of all this book learning stuff, I have been compiling this I have about a 12-page guide, and this is not a sales pitch, by the way. I'm just illustrating this. That illustrates exactly how our primal brains work. So you don't have to. I've done 3 years of PhD level work on this stuff. So here's the 6 primal fears. You can simply look at these pictures and you'll know immediately what the primitive brain is afraid of. Now, why is that important? Because if you're trying to influence or persuade or market to somebody, these fears are going to come up because the brain is trying to protect you. So if you don't bring these fears up and address them, you're going to lose a sale. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That's simple. Yeah. So, and then after that, it's pretty straightforward. Once you understand the language of the primitive brain, so the primitive brain has what we call approach values. In other words, these are the values, the emotions that it's seeking, and there's avoidance values. It's the things that it doesn't want. So it wants high status, for example, and because you don't want to be a nobody, the opposite of, like, see, I could pull one out for you. The cool thing is I have built these into charts. Once you look at these, you have an instant understanding of that. You don't have to read the books. I got it. For example, the primitive brain loves what's familiar. It does not like strangers or unknown things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Right.
like
So
alarm. Something
yeah,
happening, something new. Let's
precisely.
protect.
So once you see these, it's so obvious. And the reason I put this into this format, going back to, like you said, what the big players were doing, I noticed that the big players, as I started to dig into this research, were have you ever heard that expression? That person really knows how to push your buttons, right? If you look in this little guide, you can see what the politicians are doing. It's all right here. You can see, in fact, there's about 60 of those buttons you can choose from.
Wow.
So let me ask you, does this make sense so far to you?
Absolutely, because I also wanted to ask you, connecting what you just said. There was also research made by one company based on engagement of people in social media and analyzing their behavioral values. That was in the past all about, as you mentioned, status as well, like success, freedom, luxury lifestyle as well. So exposing this lifestyle, traveling, it's shifted so much. And nowadays it's all about like top 3 is belonging, it's safety, and it's health. Taking into consideration everything what we've said, like, because it's also impacting the purchasing behavior, like
absolutely
panic purchasing, stay home strategies, how to make this more available and safe, and create space for myself in a way that I'm not affected by any kind of external factors, especially
Yep.
during pandemic. How basically brands can rewrite their stories while they were focusing on old values while building up their businesses. And when you see this particular person, they said, oh, some people are assets, some are liabilities. And nowadays, maybe some brands that were looks like, oh, it's an asset. Nowadays, it can be maybe not a liability, but it's not the priority anymore. So how really
You
help them to rewrite their stories and focus on the people's need?
you just hit the nail right on the head. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. In fact, the fact that you've gotten this already, you've already used this and applied the knowledge I've just shared with you in the last 5 minutes. See, the key is first is self-awareness, understanding what those values are. And what I've done on these charts, and I haven't shared these with anybody. You're the very first today publicly. Tomorrow's
Exclusive
my
Make sure
so
to connect with less.
yeah. So there's about 40 of these values on here. And you can they're all applicable. It's just depending on how the time is shifting, some become more relevant than others, just like you said. Safety and certainty have always been very much part of the primal brain makeup. But interestingly enough, the primal brain also likes novelty, which kind of sounds strange.
Yeah.
Is it likes certainty, but it also gets bored very easily.
Yeah.
So the reason I developed these tools was so that, and this really is the result of billions of dollars of research. I didn't invent this. I've simply synthesized it and it made it much more simple. Now, here's the other interesting thing about this. When you, like for example, you get a lot of buying resistance because people are afraid. Trust is a big factor now. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. And we like to do business with people we know, like, and trust. But how do you trust people? Because there's a lot of I personally, I don't trust politicians at all. Or let me
Neither.
rephrase that. I trust them to lie, cheat, and steal. There, let me put it in a positive sense. But when you're dealing with so much, market and people are fighting back and forth, what is really taking place, and this is the second part I wanted to get into. It's very easy to understand why people buy, but understanding why people don't buy is even more important. And I'll tell you why. Have you ever, because as business people and entrepreneurs, we have to make sales, whether it's jewelry or information or automobile, whatever that is. And we're competing with everybody else who says theirs is better, cheaper, safer, faster, features and benefits. And I was on a call with an investment company CEO a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them a question. I said, have you ever had a client where you thought for sure you've got the sale, we've got the deal, we got the contract, and then all of a sudden it fell through? And he said, yeah. I said, did you ever wonder why? Yeah, well, I think it's because of our competition. I said, no, that's not it, believe me. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, let me ask you another question. Has that ever happened to you more than once? He's like, absolutely. And then I said, let me ask you a third question, if I may. And you don't have to tell me the dollar amount or the euro or whatever your currency is. If you lose a sale, how much does that cost you? How much have you lost? Not only in terms of the revenue, but the client acquisition, right? Marketing and things like that. And I said, I bet you for you, it's a few $1,000,000. He goes, yeah, you're right. I said, well, the reason you're losing those sales is, generally speaking, you haven't addressed one of the primal fears. Because if they have a primal fear and you don't address it, they will never tell you. Because they're too embarrassed to. People will they're too embarrassed. So you have to bring it up yourself. So there's a very simple technique that I've developed for doing that. The second reason they're not buying is they have either a false or limiting belief that's holding them back. Now, this is the stuff I discovered. And I was still stuck up until a year ago because I said, okay, I've identified all this stuff. But if somebody's got a false or a limiting belief, how do you get around that? Like, how do you fix that? Because you don't win many friends by telling them that they're wrong. Like, you don't tell your cut, no, you're wrong. You can't just say that. But it turned out there was a really obscure science developed 30 years ago, and I stumbled over it a year ago, and it's called thought reversals. So you can take any limiting belief, and once you understand how a belief is created, and it's not that complicated, beliefs are just mental shortcuts we have because we just don't have the brain capacity. So once you understand what a person's typical limiting belief is, you can shift that belief using a couple different patterns. And all of a sudden, really, what if a person was getting stuck, you do them a great service by shifting their belief because all of a sudden they can see possibilities, So for example, today people are trying to put out content and content and content, right? And you can learn anything on the internet today. There's so much content out there. It's like, go to YouTube and learn how to build your own nuclear weapon,
Well, it's a very sensitive topic nowadays.
Yeah, that's for sure. So my point is just by giving, people don't necessarily need more information. What is more useful to them, is if you can shift the way they look at the world. Because quite often, the way you approach a problem is the problem itself. So to give you an example, many people feel bad about selling, or they have a negative association with selling or marketing or persuasion or influence. And I say it's because you're looking at it the wrong way. There's never been a Hollywood film that's portrayed sales and marketing people in a nice light. They're always being portrayed as con men, like Jordan Belfort or Wolf of Wall Street kind of thing. So what happens is, what selling and persuasion really is helping people to move from less to more. That's all it is. You're taking them from where they are now to being in a better place here. The only exception to that is if you're selling weight loss, then you want to take them from more to less. But generally speaking, people want to go from, maybe they want to have bigger homes. So you go from less to more, but they may have limiting beliefs or fears in between. So by using this technology, you become the person who helps them get them out of their own way. And then because when you change the way a person looks at the world, you literally change their life. And so you have not only made a sale, you've not only gained a client, you've gained a friend for life. Because someone who shifts, our beliefs literally run our lives. The challenge is most of them aren't really facts. They're just kind of shortcuts that we put together. And I can give you an example of that. I worked with a very powerful business lady about 6 or 7 years ago, and she wanted to do property investing. And I said, well, you've got the wrong coach, because that's not what I do. And I said, let's just talk anyways, because I'll find you a different coach to work with who does property. But as we got into a discussion, I started listening. She goes, you know what? I've got a real problem here because I sold my business a few years ago. Like, I made $20 million. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she goes, yeah, but I'm stuck. I can't seem to get started. I go, $20 million? What do you need? 120 million? It's like, I don't see that as a problem. She goes, no, you know what it is? I went through a terrible divorce, and every time I leave the house, I feel like I'm abandoning my children. So every time I go to start a new business, I have this thing that pulls me back. And I said, well, where did you get that from? She says, well, my husband said that was the problem with the divorce, that I was too focused on the business and ignoring the children. And so here is a person who is in tremendous emotional pain, has every capacity to move forward, but can't. She feels emotionally trapped. So I said, how old are your kids? She says, 8 or 10. I said, well, are you going away for years at a time? No. She goes, I need to leave the house a couple times a week for 2 hours. And I said, oh, you're not abandoning them. You're teaching them self-reliance. So I shifted her perspective just by saying, you're not abandoning your children. They're 8 and 10 years old. You want them to be self-reliant adults. You're giving them a gift. They're learning how to be independent. And the moment I said that, Valerie, her face just went, oh my God, you've done it. I was like, done what? She goes, you freed me after 2 years of misery and $200,000 in therapy. So that's just a little example. That was a thought reversal that I used right there. I simply, it's kind of like the glass is half full or half empty kind of thing. And there is a system of patterns that you can learn as an entrepreneur. And they're right in here. They look like this. That's it.
That's
and
it.
if you use it, anyone can learn this. Anyone. Absolutely anyone. In fact, it's almost better if you don't know anything about sales marketing, because then you won't have to unlearn all that old stuff.
Exactly. That's how I actually feel. And because, well, talking about the consumer behavior and
Mhm.
going to the applying all these things that we are discussing and turning it maybe into the marketing campaign, for example. And what
Mhm.
you just mentioned is more like a mindset and emotional behavior, how you can build up your service or product, pack it in a way that people have this emotional attachment, or they feel
Bingo.
like,
Yep.
wow, I have like the whole life just changed thanks to what you're offering to me. But there are different like ways. As a founders, we will always say you have to create value, you have to find the solution to a problem, and that's the key to sell. From the other side, we see on the shelves tons of products that we honestly don't need, and we are fine and we're healthier and we're happier not having them in our life. But we were
Mhm.
sold that we must have them. This is the necessity because of
Yeah.
marketing. And our emotional state is now so much shifted. And we feel like,
Yes.
oh, when I see this product, my mood, like when I think about coffee, I have such an amazing mood already.
Yeah.
So the question is like, what does it make sense to you as a market as well? Because that's what you were also doing and helping people to launch so many businesses and products. Which of these strategies are working nowadays, taking into consideration all these changes and shifts? Because you also mentioned these buttons that you can, press and activate.
Yeah. Well, see, if you're an ethical person and an honest person, you want to have the fact of the matter is, if you're talking about persuasion or influence or selling or marketing, or let's call it manipulation, if you will, you could say all those words and it'd be the same thing. So it's not the tools, right? Because we have lots of these tools. Like I've created this tool, but it's the intent with which it's used. It's like a knife. You can use a knife for butter, or you can use it to stab somebody, which we don't want to do. The reason I developed this stuff originally, when I started this started in 2020 actually, when COVID hit. I thought I want to figure out what these guys are doing, and this was first a tool to prevent getting manipulated. So once I broke down and I identified what they were doing, I said, oh my gosh, really, really good entrepreneurs could use this for the best. Because a lot of times as business people, we're trying to make people's lives better. That's what we're doing. Like, is we want to move them from less to more. We want a better life, better health, better relationships, better spiritual sense. And so number one was knowing how these tools are being used against us. But then you as a business person can use them very ethically to help people succeed, help them get over their fears, get out of their own way. And that's what to me is so exciting about this kind of stuff, because um, the single greatest thing we have is as human beings as an asset really is our influence. because anything you want to be, do, or have must be done through other people. As they say, no man does it alone. No person can do anything by themselves. You need a team, you need a tribe, you need a community. Women are particularly, by the way, from the primitive brain standpoint, women are totally wired for community. They're way better than men at it. That's not me. That's the science. Don't blame me.
I can confirm we are building long-term, vision-driven communities. That's how it is.
And you're also better at multitasking. And this is why, for me, having women in business today, far more than it's ever been, is a way better dynamic. Because now you have really great simpatico complementary teamwork where people are bringing their strengths to things. And that to me is very exciting. I love outsourcing my weaknesses. I don't bother trying to strengthen my weaknesses. I just outsource them so I can stick to what I'm good at. But I guess the biggest thing I love about this is, like I said, the more you're aware of how this part of the brain works, the more you can influence other people to get things done. And by helping, it's like Zig Ziglar said, you can get anything you want by helping other people get what they want. So now we truly understand what people want. And a great example is you had someone on your podcast who was making jewelry, if I remember correct, right?
Yeah.
So I had a client in Singapore who was making beautiful jewelry, but they were having trouble competing. The product was amazing, absolutely amazing, but they were having trouble competing. And I said, you know what the problem is? You're trying to sell jewelry, and jewelry is pretty, and it's metal, and it's stones, and it's rocks. I wanted to speak very plainly. Yeah, right. But I said, if you sell an emotion, you're going to sell a lot more, because anybody can make jewelry, but selling an emotion is a different story. So in this case, we focused on jewelry for a woman as a way of building your own self-esteem, self-love, self-appreciation, right? Because everybody struggles with that. Am I worthy enough? So we focused on, all their messaging was about wearable love. We don't sell jewelry, we sell wearable love. It's like, what was the company that was so big that was selling the, as we used to call them, charm bracelets? What's the name of that company? They're all over the world. Oh, it just escapes me. Pandora, that's it, yeah. So I remember when my mother had a charm bracelet. But see, Pandora doesn't sell charm bracelets, they sell memories. And that's the distinction. Anybody can make a charm bracelet, but sell it. No, that's not what we do. We sell memories. So if you get into this little booklet, you can go, oh, why don't we try selling that instead? Like you said, a value, self-love is a beautiful value. It's not about ego or pride. It's about having, self-confidence and self-assuredness and things like that. And so once we focus that, all of a sudden everything took off, because nobody can compete with that. So the whole key here is taking your business and finding what those primal brain triggers are and helping that person achieve that. Like, nobody buys a Ferrari because it's good on gas. Right?
Yeah.
That is total status. That's all it is. And so if you start to think like that, and sometimes you can sell using these tools by helping people avoid what they don't want. Like, a lot of people are promoting visibility right now. Well, visibility is very desirable to the primitive brain, because the more visible you are, the more status you have. What we don't want to be is invisible. If you're invisible, you're probably a homeless person. So the brain wants to avoid that. So by tailoring our marketing, by putting these different buttons in, and that's really what I developed this for. You can take these buttons and add in the ones that are appropriate to your business. You don't have to sit and figure it out anymore. It's all there. It's like click, 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 click. And the downside of this is this is what our politicians are using against us. So, for example, you'll hear them say, be home, stay safe. Okay, so they're punching our safety button. They're also uh, trust the science. Well, primitive brain loves authority, so trust the science is an authority button. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's brilliant. But also, what you said is, I think no matter what kind of tool humanity gets, it's up to your choice. You use it for good or for bad.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's definitely completely changes the view how you perceive what you are offering on the market.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's as we mentioned, not just the benefit. It's so much more that people attach their emotions, and I don't know, can be legacy, can be whatever.
Yeah.
And like talking about emotions, because
Hmm.
nowadays it just happened just a week ago. We lived a normal life, and suddenly so many things changed. And
Hmm.
I understand that there are parts of this world they were struggling and seeing worse, like the whole generations probably. Some people
Yeah.
were born during the war and they're still facing it. And
Yes.
here
Yeah.
we are talking about the Western world that was all about strong purchasing power, specific lifestyle, specific beliefs. And now we don't have it anymore. And it's kind of split of people's necessities and priorities. If
Yes.
I don't know exactly how it's in Canada, but what I hear from US and people in US is all about, oh, gas prices, crazy thing. And here, like taking like myself, when I open my eyes, the first thing, I'm just so grateful that we made it this night. We don't have SOS alarms. We still can send our children in kindergarten or school like safely, even though if I go out, I literally see a lot of people because we have a lot of immigrants from our neighbor country,
Hmm.
from the Ukraine, who are in
Yeah.
struggle, who are in pain. And I believe
Yeah.
all people we have in our genes this memory of war,
Yes.
this
Yeah.
horror. We feel this pain.
Yes.
And my question would be related to because I'm frustrated nowadays as well.
Hmm.
I see a lot of entrepreneurs are posting like, I'm losing in a way focus, and I'm just like don't feel like I can advertise myself, my product, my service. Even though I understand it can benefit people, I have to keep myself up that I can serve people better. But I'm really starting to avoid social media. As long as I go there, it's all about what is going on.
Yeah.
And you want or you're not, like I was crying several days in a row. It was hard to put myself together,
Yes.
but in a way I'm like have some also tools how to put myself anywhere together and move forward. But I see a lot of people are lost. How can I advertise when be still relevant, be sensitive, but at the same time make sales, make keep my employees and people like I have responsibility to pay people for this. I need to make sales. I need to make my business grow. So in this kind of times, how to really stay sensitive, but at the same time send the right message.
Well, a couple of things there. That's another really good question, and it's a difficult question. And we are all, first of all, like you said, like you and my family, this has affected us here in Canada too. It's really I don't want to harp on about the negative too much, but the lockdown measures have destroyed small business here.
Mm.
I mean, probably 60% of our small businesses we've lost. You know, millions of people out of work. It's our inflation last year was 27%.
Oh.
Last in January alone it went up another 6.7%. So where I live specifically in the province of Ontario, Canada, our housing prices are going through the roof. The average house, get this, the average home to buy here is $1 million. Nobody who's coming up now can afford that. And there's so much pressure on the market. For example, houses now, the average house is $1 million. If it goes up for sale at $1 million, it'll sell for $1.3 million in a week, because just this artificial inflationary thing that's going on, without getting too technical. Now, what's happened is it's forcing a lot of people out of their homes. Like, landlords are saying, hey, I can make big bucks because they bought a home for $400,000 10 years ago. Now it's worth $1.3 million. That's a heck of a good investment. But you have the people getting thrown out of their homes, and so it's put pressure on the rental market. And here, like, a 1-bedroom apartment is about $2,000 now. Wow, like, for a shoebox. That's, now for Canada, I know things are different in different parts of the world, but that's expensive for here. You know, butter has gone up to like $8.50 for a pound of butter, so to speak. So, having said that, it's quite normal to feel angry and frustrated. And so there's two things I want to talk about to address what you're saying. Is number one is almost feeling guilty for marketing, because there's so much, like you said, on social media, it's all about what's going on here and what's happening here, and people arguing all the time. You know, you don't know the science, you're a conspiracy theorist, all this battling.
We've never
back
had
and
so
forth.
many virusologists and politicians.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the funny thing is, again, a lot of that's not facts. Those are belief systems. And I'm fascinated by belief systems. And once you understand how they're formed, you go, wow, I really believed a lot of stupid stuff for a long time. But it's not a criticism. It's just, whatever you believe is true to you. That's a fact. It may not be factual, but your perspective is true to you. The way you see the world is true to you. So we have to respect that in people. So I don't get into arguments online. But it's interesting. Someone that I'd coached from Germany the other day had said, I'm getting criticized for promoting, truth and beauty, and still putting on my makeup and dressing up nicely and things like that. I'm getting criticized because people saying you're too shallow for all that. And so, using a thought reversal, I just said, when times are difficult, truth and beauty are the most important things. They're the things that make life worth living. And wow, you should have seen the response to that. So all I did was take the same argument and flip it around. So whatever it is you're doing, when you're out there in business, when you're trying to actually improve people's lives, and marketing is just how we get people's attention to do that, you're making a positive impact. A positive anything's better than a negative nothing. And that's the way I look at it. Just because this stuff is going on in the world doesn't mean we have to buy into it or engage in it. Our economy, this whole business of what's essential and non-essential is really ridiculous. All of it is essential. Most of our economy is built on things like music and art and poetry and clothing and beauty and all these things that make life so rich. Food, restaurants, that's the real, and anything, if we're business people, we're helping people to promote that. That's what makes life rich. So I'm all for that. And if you don't like it, well, you can go back into your cubby hole and be a keyboard warrior. Be my guest, right? So, and that's part one. And then, so again, that's just shifting your belief, shifting the way you look at something. And I'll share, if I may, why that's so important, because you spoke about the war. I don't know if you've ever read this book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. You may or may not have heard of it. It's been around a long, long time. Viktor Frankl was a World War II concentration camp survivor. And while he was in the camp, and of course the conditions were terrible in those days, he noticed that there was two types of people. One type of person said, this is never going to end. This is horrible. Humanity is doomed. And they would just literally just curl up and die. Even though they could have survived physically, they just gave up mentally and they curled up and died. They just gave up all hope. And then there was a second person in the camp, second type of person, who was equal terrible conditions, typhoid, dirty, food is poor, blah, blah, blah. But this person shifted their perspective and gave
Yeah.
the event meaning that made them more resourceful. And as human beings, we have that capacity to do that at any time, but it has to be a conscious choice. And the challenge is we usually don't do it until our backs are right up against the wall. It's like, well, the ship is sinking. I better think positive. And it's not about positive thinking. What it does do is if you shift your perspective, for example, and I said this to a lady I was coaching the other day, she goes, I feel I've lost my home. I had to move into my parents' place and things are terrible. And I just feel like I'm on a sinking ship. And I said, well, is it the Titanic or is it a rowboat? And she goes, you're not funny. I said, I know I'm a little funny. I said, well, listen, if it's a rowboat, how deep is the water? She said, well, what do you mean? I said, listen, it's not the event. It's your perception and interpretation of it. Because this is how beliefs are created. We see an event happen and then we give it meaning. And it's yes, it sucks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not ignoring the fact that that sucks. It's a horrible situation. But the meaning you give to it won't change your resources, but it will make you more resourceful. So I said, listen, if you're on the Titanic, it's sinking. It's going to go down. There's no way around that. But if you just say, well, that doesn't, I'm doomed and we're going to drown, then you're going to be dead. But if you say, wait a second, this is a ship, there's lifeboats here someplace. And if there's a lifeboat, I've got a chance. So you get resourceful and you go you start to look for, okay, maybe there's an opportunity. You know, Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich, famous book. My favorite line from that book is, within every adversity is the seed of an equal or greater benefit. So you can take that same situation and say, yeah, there's all this negative stuff going on, but how can I use this to serve me? How does this serve me? And that's what dove me into this, actually, which is like, how do we take what's going on in the mind? Because this is all in the mind. The event is one thing, but our approach is all in the mind. It's all mindset. And I don't mean to say, mindset, positive mindset. This is not about trying to think positive. It's a mindset of resourcefulness. Okay, this sucks, but there's a benefit here. How can I use this to my benefit? So when I said that to her, I said, so are you still on the Titanic or is it just a rowboat? She goes, no, I'm thinking it's more like a rowboat and the water isn't this deep. Because she's like, I'm staying at my parents and I can't focus. And she's blowing this thing up, you know? I said, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, so to speak. It's like, calm down. How can you focus? Where can you put your attention? How does this benefit you? Start thinking of ways this benefits you. Look at my God, you don't have a mortgage to deal with anymore. That's a huge pressure. Yes, okay, it's a pain in the butt being around the parents, but you can work around that and focus on getting to work serving others. So the whole thing about behavioral change today that I'm sharing with you is exactly that, is shifting your perspective. And that's really where the last part of this stuff comes in. It's about shifting your perspective. Because there's actually 16 different perspectives to any belief. Did you know that?
No.
You have one, but there's 15 others. So there's 15 different ways of looking at the same problem. And it's not that the problem changes, but your resourcefulness will change. Just like with the lady I'd said, you're teaching your kids self-reliance. All of a sudden she's going, oh, I'm not hurting them, I'm helping them. And immediately she was like, took off like a rocket. The situation hadn't changed at all. She was still dropping the kids off twice a week, 2 hours a day. And they had a caretaker, for Pete's sakes. It's not like that she was being left alone, but she had this enormous burden of guilt because she had bought into somebody else's perception or description or judgment about what she was doing. And that's the problem with beliefs. We attach meaning and we don't bother to think that, hey, maybe there's a different kind of meaning to this. So if you shift what things mean, it doesn't change a rotten situation, but it's like, if you got a pile of dog crap on your grass, you can either complain about it or you can use it for fertilizer. It's still dog crap, but one way has a benefit at least. I know I'm being a little silly. I want to put some humor into this,
but this is like perfectly explained a lot of things. And I actually invite all our listeners and viewers to take your situation, what you're struggling nowadays, and just apply this amazing tool and shift your belief system and actually answer this question: what benefits do you have? And that's,
yeah.
yeah, it's brilliant,
I'll,
applicable
let,
for anything, business, for life, for relationships, any parts.
let me throw another one here's another question you can use for that. What benefit do I have? Or this is a complete disaster. Here's a sentence. You can write this down. What if the opposite is true? Ask yourself that question. What if the opposite is true? What if this is going to be my greatest opportunity in the world and I just don't know it yet? And I'll tell you what, I have a son. He's a successful filmmaker. He makes movies. And 2 years ago, he was making a film that came out last year. It's very, very successful. It's a big hit. But when he was making it, he was having the worst time possible. The crew was impossible. They weren't cooperative. His set designer quit 3 weeks before they were going on set to film. I mean, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. I mean, everything. His computer died. And he's like, Dad, this script is awful and it sucks and this is going to be a failure and la da da. And he was just melting down because of the situation. And I simply said, his name is Reese. And I said, Reese, what if the opposite is true? What if this script that you think is a pile of crap turns out to be your first big hit? And what if that opens all these doors? And he was like, Dad, stop trying to be a coach. I don't want to, because he was in a bad state. But I was trying to say, what if the opposite is true? And so that gave him the mental resources to regroup, get back to work. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. It became a big hit for his production company, and it kicked open all sorts of doors. He just finished directing 2 TV series for Universal Studios. I mean, it's amazing. The situation was awful. It sucked. The only thing we shifted was the belief about it. What if the opposite is true? What is the opposite of true? Because if you do that, you start to go, hey, wait a second. Maybe this is a great, when I saw all this stuff, people going online, my first thought was, oh my God, this is a disaster. How are we going to compete with this? And then I thought, wait a second, this is great because it's going to weed out all the lousy competition. They're going to go cut their own throats and it'll make room for good. And that's why I see anyone who's good, who's bringing value. If you make jewelry, you're bringing something beautiful to the world. I mean, if you're helping people, coach people, like I said, kind of what we're doing here today, shifting their perspective, that's valuable. Because a lot of what's going on right now is psychological warfare, quite frankly. And so you can be a victim of it, or you can understand how it works and say, you know what? I'm sorry, but I don't subscribe to your interpretation of these events, because that's what it is. I've told that to people. They get all rankled and I say, I'm sorry, I just don't see it that way. What do you mean you don't see it that way? It's the facts. I go, I don't subscribe to your interpretation of these events. I respect your interpretation, but it's not my interpretation. And that's really what a belief is. It's not facts. And I'm not talking about religious beliefs and stuff like that. I'm just talking about world events. Yes, this sucks, but I'm going to interpret it in a way that it serves me. So the last piece of advice, if I may, to share with your listeners, is don't subscribe to any belief or interpretation unless it serves you. If it doesn't serve you, throw it out. Just discard it. I'll just pull this out and don't subscribe to any interpretation of an event unless it serves you. And if you can't find one, say, what if the opposite were true? What if this is an incredible gift? And that will change your life, because it's not going to make you more money, not right away. It's not going to fix things right away, but it will make you resourceful. And you'll go, wait a second. You'll start to pay attention. Your brain will wake up and start to look for resources, because that's what the primitive brain is really good for. It's looking for survival and resources. And so what happened to me is I started reaching out to people that I haven't talked to in a few years. I go, hey, you know what? Are you having this problem? I got a solution for you. Hey, so-and-so, let me talk to you. And I've reached out to people and like, oh my God, Les, you're calling me? And I said, yeah, I can help you with some stuff. So I started reaching out to people and saying, listen, I know we're all in this crap together, but I have a way out to help you. No, it's not going to make money land in your pocket immediately, but you're going to get resourceful. You're going to find more clients. You're going to find better solutions. Once you're resourceful, all sorts of things start to happen. If that makes sense to you.
Absolutely. So, I love it. I personally love it. Thank you very much for sharing such amazing tools that is not just, sometimes people say like very broad, general things and nothing really specific. And I think our conversation today really touches the base, how you can change, operate using it sounds simple, but it's so transformational. So thank you for this. And at the end, I ask all my guests to imagine, because I believe we are all creators of our own universe. And
absolutely,
as a less creator from this perspective, what would be your message to our viewers, our listeners, and what your voice would like to project, in a way, inspire and light up?
Well, the thing I'd say is look at if you want to think in terms of consequences, like I just said before. What if this is the greatest thing? Think of going from a state of a problem mindset to a positive intent. Like, because right now people are focused on their problems. I've got this problem. I've got this is, the economy is this, the politicians are that. The government is this. So we've defined what the problem is. Yes, the government is like, I'm speaking for Canada. Here, I'm angry with the government because they've wrecked a lot of businesses. And then the frustrating thing is, as I'm sure many people can relate to, there are people who had steady jobs all the way through. They haven't been affected at all. And they think, no, it's more important to be safe. And listen, what they're feeling is genuine. That's a genuine concern. Some of us don't subscribe to that interpretation. My interpretation is, if we don't get the economy back on track, you're going to be unsafe very soon. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I'm being a little funny here, but if we get stuck in, we're focused on the problem is the people, or the government is this, and yes, those are valid problems. But what is our intent? We have to stop focusing on the problem, because we just swim in that bucket. So we go, what is my positive intention? What do I want to do? Because I'm so sick and tired. I'm so frustrated. Well, instead of being sick and tired or frustrated, what do you want to feel? I want to feel good. I want to feel safe. Okay. And I've often said, don't ask yourself, be specific. What do I need to do that? Who do I need on my team? What do I want to accomplish? Okay, if I'm losing my house, don't complain about losing your house. What do you want? Well, I don't want to be living at my parents' place. No, you're in the problem box. What do you want? I want to move to a penthouse suite. That's a positive intent. Great. How do we do that? I want to move. I don't want to live with my parents anymore. Well, I don't have the money. Well, let's find a way then. Let's get resourceful. Who do we know? You're a smart person. You've got all sorts of skills and abilities. Who do you know that needs your help? How much this has cost? Who do you know in real estate? Who do you know? It's like, what do I need to do? And who would win? Those are positive intent questions, instead of saying, oh, I'm stuck at my parents' house. What do you want? Don't complain about that. What do you want? I lost my car. Great. What's the next one? What do you want? I can't afford it. We'll find the way. There's always a way once you get resourceful. But we want to wallow in our misery, and that's normal. That's perfectly normal. But the way you shift, when you shift your perspective and say, What if the opposite is true? And also, you can use some negative pressure on yourself. Say, listen, if I keep thinking like this, what is the consequence going to be? It's going to be bad because things are going to get worse. It's the thinking that makes heaven or hell out of a situation. Helen Keller.
Wow. I think it's a beautiful summary. Thank you very much one more time. And once again, don't subscribe as Les told to the interpretations that don't serve you. However, if you find that this channel serves you as an entrepreneur or entrepreneur to be who is looking for some tangible tools and applicable strategies to start really growing your business no matter what kind of situations and times in the world is, so don't forget to subscribe, like, share, press notification button, because you don't want to miss our very next episode that will be all about how to make money.